I've always been a hard worker. Long hours at the firm, late nights, early mornings, whatever it took to provide the life Caitlin and I had always dreamed of. I used to think that was enough. That as long as I worked hard and kept our home secure, everything else would fall into place. But over time, things changed. Our marriage, once full of excitement and warmth, had become something else entirely. The spontaneous date nights dwindled, replaced by silent evenings in front of the TV. Her laughter, once effortless and bright, became rare, forced. She started coming home later, offering vague explanations about errands or catching up with old friends, none of whom I ever saw or heard about again. Even in bed, there was distance. She would turn away, feigning exhaustion or stress, shutting down any intimacy before it could even begin. Conversations were short and empty, nothing more than updates on our schedules. Dinners were quiet, the kind of quiet that wasn't comfortable, but heavy. The kind that filled the air with things left unsaid. I noticed it long before I admitted it to myself. Maybe that's why I started taking short breaks from work, weekends off here and there, cutting out overtime, coming home early to surprise her. I thought maybe we just needed more time together. We had been married for 5 years, planning for children, and it seemed like the natural next step. But something was off. I could feel it before I could explain it. And then, one evening, she made it all too clear. I was sitting at the kitchen table, exhaustion clinging to me like a second skin after another grueling day at work. Caitlin stood by the counter, pretending to busy herself with the dishes before turning to me. "I think we should open up our marriage," she said, her tone light, too light. Like she was suggesting we repaint the living room, not drop a bomb on our entire relationship. I set my fork down slowly, staring at her. "What?" She gave me this little smile, like she was expecting me to be intrigued, maybe even excited. "I think it would be good for us," she continued, stepping closer. "Bring back the spark. You know, make us appreciate each other more." My stomach turned. I knew what this was. She went on, laying it out like some modern, enlightened approach to marriage, something progressive couples did. She framed it like a fresh start, a way to deepen our connection, an ironic claim, considering how effortlessly we had once found that connection without needing anyone else. But all I heard was a rehearsed speech, carefully structured to make it sound like an opportunity instead of what it really was. Permission. A justification for something she was already doing. I watched her closely. She avoided my eyes, focusing too much on wiping an already clean counter. There was a tightness in her shoulders, a hesitation in her voice that betrayed her. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. Caitlin's hands froze. Just for a second. A flicker of something in her eyes before she let out a forced laugh. "What are you talking about?" I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. "You don't just wake up one day and decide we should see other people, Caitlin. Not unless you already have someone in mind." Her jaw tightened. "That's not fair." I let the silence stretch between us. I didn't need to say anything else. She was caught, and we both knew it. After a long pause, she sighed, rubbing her temple like I was exhausting her. "Look, Edgar. I just think this could be good for us. I love you, but I don't want us to feel stuck." Stuck. I bit back the bitter laugh threatening to escape. I had given this woman everything. A home. Stability. Love. And here she was, acting like it wasn't enough. Like I wasn't enough. But I didn't lose my temper. No, that's what she was expecting, maybe even hoping for. If I got angry, she could shift the blame. Make it about me, about my stubbornness or my unwillingness to evolve. So I played along. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "You know what? You might be right." Her eyebrows lifted in surprise, and for the first time, I saw something else in her expression. Suspicion. "Really?" I nodded. "If this is something you really think could help us, then let's talk about it." She hesitated, like she couldn't quite believe I was agreeing. Then she relaxed, a slow smile spreading across her lips. "I knew you'd understand," she said, stepping around the table to hug me. A stiff, mechanical embrace. No kiss. No warmth. She was relieved. I had just given her the answer she wanted. Except I wasn't going to play the fool. That night, as she slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Every fiber of my being told me that I had just uncovered something rotten, something she thought she could keep hidden. The next morning, I got to work. I didn't waste time. That weekend, I checked our shared accounts, combing through transactions I had never paid much attention to before. And that's when I found it. A flight. A hotel in a neighboring state. A reservation that had nothing to do with me. My pulse pounded in my ears. I scrolled further. More charges, expensive restaurants, luxury gifts, and the one that sealed it all. A boutique specializing in men's designer clothing. I had never stepped foot in that store. I had never owned a single item from that brand. Yet there it was, hundreds of dollars spent on bespoke suits and accessories. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. This wasn't just a case of spending too much money. This wasn't a midlife crisis shopping spree. This was something else entirely. These weren't gifts for a friend. These were wardrobe upgrades for someone else. My hands clenched into fists as I shut the laptop. She wasn't just betraying me. She was rewriting our entire marriage behind my back, erasing everything we had built together. And that realization only strengthened my resolve. I needed to know exactly who he was and how far this had gone. She was dressing him in my money. And now I was going to find out exactly who he was. The hardest part wasn't the suspicion. It wasn't even the confirmation. It was the waiting. Every day I played my role. The husband too tired to notice, too trusting to question. It wasn't easy. Some nights, my anger boiled just beneath the surface, threatening to spill over. Other times, I felt the weight of it all pressing down, a suffocating mix of betrayal and restraint. But I held on, reminding myself that patience would bring me the truth I needed. I kissed her good morning, pretended to listen as she rattled off her plans, and made sure to keep my reactions neutral whenever she mentioned a girls' night out or a spa weekend. But beneath the surface, I was watching. Calculating. I had always believed that if you paid attention, the truth would reveal itself. And I was right. With a combination of tracking apps and subtle observation, I pieced together the pattern. She wasn't going out with friends. She wasn't running errands. She had a place, a secluded cabin just outside of town, nestled in the woods like it was built for secrets. The first time I saw it on the tracker, I told myself it might be a fluke. Maybe she was meeting someone innocent, a friend she hadn't mentioned. But then I checked again. And again. And every time, the destination was the same. So I went there. It was a weekday afternoon when I pulled up to the dirt road leading to the cabin, parking far enough away that she wouldn't notice my car. I waited, my heartbeat steady despite the storm brewing inside me. And then, right on cue, she arrived. I watched from a distance as she stepped out of her car, adjusting her hair in the side mirror before making her way to the front door. She didn't even knock. She had a key. My hands clenched into fists, a slow burn rising in my chest. That single detail told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a one-time mistake, a fleeting lapse in judgment. She had been coming here often, comfortable enough to walk right in like she belonged. And then the door opened, and I finally saw him. Ryan. My stomach dropped. My sister Em's boyfriend. The man she had introduced us to just months ago. The man I had shaken hands with, welcomed into our family. The man Caitlin was betraying me with. I felt a slow, cold rage settle in my bones. This wasn't just a fling. It wasn't some impulsive mistake. This was calculated, deliberate. They had planned this. I didn't confront them. Not yet. If I rushed in without solid proof, they'd lie, twist the truth, make me look paranoid. I needed to be patient, to wait for the perfect moment, one where they couldn't talk their way out of it. I needed proof. Something undeniable, something that neither of them could twist into some half-hearted excuse. I turned away, leaving as quietly as I had come. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I didn't tell Em right away. I needed to be sure. And I needed a plan. For the next week, I became a ghost in my own marriage. I let Caitlin believe I was oblivious, letting her go about her charade while I worked behind the scenes. I went through her phone when she was in the shower, scanning her messages for anything useful. I found plenty. Plans for their next meetup. Details about their weekends together. Mentions of me casual, dismissive. He doesn't suspect a thing. It's fine. He's always busy. It took everything in me not to wake her up right then and there and throw her out of our house. But I forced myself to stay calm. I needed to play this smart. That's when I went to M. I had never seen my sister cry like that before. Not when she broke her arm as a kid, not even when our father passed away. This was different. This was betrayal from the person she had trusted most. She didn't ask me if I was sure. She knew I wouldn't bring this to her unless I had undeniable proof. We sat in her apartment for hours, going over everything, piecing together our next steps. We don't just expose them, she said, voice shaking but firm. We make them feel it. So that's exactly what we did. First, I needed to plant something they wouldn't notice. I bought a small, high-quality recorder and tucked it into Caitlin's car, right under the driver's seat. It would pick up everything. Conversations, phone calls, every whispered plan they made in the safety of what they thought was a private space. Then I started collecting receipts. I went through our shared bank statements and printed everything that pointed to the affair. Hotel bookings. Dinner reservations. That overpriced boutique purchase. Every single transaction that tied them together. But we weren't done. We needed one final piece. Without it, they could deny everything, twist the truth, make excuses, and manipulate their way out. We needed something irrefutable, something that would leave them with no room to escape. We needed them caught in the act. The weekend arrived sooner than I expected, but I was ready. The days leading up to it had been agonizing, every moment stretching endlessly as I fought to keep up the facade. My mind raced through every possible outcome. Would she sense something was off? Would Ryan convince her to change their plans? The anticipation gnawed at me, but I forced myself to stay composed. Now, standing at the edge of the inevitable, there was no turning back. I told Caitlin I had a late shift at work, something that barely earned a glance from her as she scrolled through her phone. She had already checked out of our marriage. She thought she was getting away with it. She had no idea. Em and I had planned everything down to the last detail. The cabin reservation had been made under her name, with check-in set just an hour before Caitlin and Ryan were supposed to arrive. I let him drive while I sat quietly, my hands clenched into fists, my mind replaying everything I had uncovered. The deception. The laughter in their messages. The casual way they spoke about me like I was nothing more than an obstacle to their happiness. I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me, but I forced myself to stay focused. Tonight, there would be no more secrets. No more lies. When we arrived at the cabin, the air was thick with tension. It was a cozy, secluded place, the kind of spot meant for stolen moments and whispered confessions. The irony wasn't lost on me. We parked out of sight, Em's grip on the steering wheel tightening as she exhaled sharply. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. I nodded. More than ever. We barely had time to get inside before headlights cut through the darkness. They were early. My pulse quickened as I peeked through the window. Caitlin and Ryan stepped out of the car, laughing, completely oblivious to what was waiting for them. The moment was surreal. I had spent weeks imagining how this confrontation would unfold, but nothing prepared me for the rage that simmered beneath my skin. My pulse pounded in my ears, my fists clenched so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. Every muscle in my body tensed as I forced myself to stay still, to not storm out and rip them apart right then and there. I watched my wife wrap her arms around him, her touch so familiar, so practiced, as if she had never done the same to me. As if she had never done the same to me. Em reached for my hand, grounding me. "We do this together," she whispered. I nodded and stepped toward the door, gripping the handle tightly before pushing it open. Caitlin's laughter died instantly. Ryan froze. They stared at us, confusion morphing into panic as reality crashed down on them. "Going somewhere?" I asked, my voice even, controlled. Caitlin's face turned ghostly pale. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Ryan took a small step back as if considering running, but there was nowhere to go. Em stepped forward, holding up her phone. "We know everything." Her thumb hovered over the screen, the glow illuminating the evidence, screenshots of messages, photos of them together, and voice recordings of whispered conversations. Every lie. Every betrayal. Her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes were fierce. Every lie. Every betrayal. Ryan's gaze darted between us, searching for an escape, an excuse, anything that could get him out of this mess. But there was no way out. Caitlin took a shaky breath, finally finding her voice. "Edgar, listen, I can explain." I let out a cold laugh, reaching into my jacket. "Oh, I bet you can." I pulled out a folder and tossed it onto the porch between us. Printed bank statements, hotel receipts, and transcriptions of their recorded conversations spilled onto the wooden floor. "This is your idea of bringing back the spark?" She flinched at the words she had once used so casually. "It's not what you think." Em scoffed. "Really?" "Because it looks exactly like what we think." She turned to Ryan, her expression unreadable. "You told me you loved me. That I was the only one." Her voice wavered, but she quickly steadied herself. "Was I just a placeholder while you ran off with my brother's wife?" Ryan stammered, his face contorted in guilt, but no words came out. For a moment, there was only silence. The weight of their betrayal hung heavy in the air, pressing down on all of us. Then, Caitlin did something that made my blood boil. She scoffed, a sharp, dismissive sound, like we were beneath her, like we were the ones making a scene over nothing. Not an apology. Not even shame. A scoff, like she was the victim here. Like we were the ones overreacting. "Are you serious?" she said, folding her arms. "You set this whole thing up? You stalked me, went through my stuff. What kind of person does that?" Em let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Oh, I don't know, Caitlin. Maybe the kind of person who isn't a lying, cheating hypocrite." Caitlin rolled her eyes, but I saw the flicker of fear beneath her bravado. "This is ridiculous. Edgar, you and I both know things haven't been great between us. You barely pay attention to me anymore, and I held up a hand, cutting her off. "Don't." My voice was calm, but firm. "Don't you dare try to pin this on me." She fell silent. Ryan took a step forward. "Look, man, I turned to him sharply. "You don't get to talk to me." His mouth shut instantly. Em crossed her arms. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Even the night seemed to hold its breath. The weight of everything we had just exposed settled like a storm cloud over the four of us, pressing down, demanding an answer. Finally, she spoke. "So what now?" That was the question, wasn't it? What now? I wasn't done. Not even close. Caitlin had spent months sneaking around behind my back, lying to my face, acting as if I were too stupid or too blind to see it. She had humiliated me, disrespected our marriage, and worst of all, betrayed every ounce of trust one had ever given her. And now, it was time for her to feel what that was like. The morning after the confrontation, I made sure the truth spread like wildfire. I didn't embellish anything I didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. I sent the receipts, the messages, and the recordings to the people who mattered most in Caitlin's life, her family, her best friend, and even a few of her coworkers who had always believed she was a devoted wife. I didn't send them out of spite. I sent them so there would be no room for her to manipulate the story, no chance for her to twist reality to suit her needs. The reactions were brutal. Her best friend, disgusted, blocked her number and cut her off completely. Her parents, initially in disbelief, were devastated. Her mother called me, voice shaking, apologizing over and over, as if she were somehow responsible for the daughter who had thrown everything away. Her father, a man who had once called me his son, simply muttered, "I never thought she was capable of this." That was the last time I ever spoke to them. The fallout extended beyond her personal life. Word got around at work. I didn't have to tell anyone. Someone must have whispered to the right person, because soon enough, she became a pariah in her own office. Cold stares replaced friendly greetings. Conversations stopped when she entered the break room. People she had once called colleagues suddenly wanted nothing to do with her. She had built a life based on perception, an image of the perfect wife, the charming coworker, the social butterfly. And now that image was shattered. The people she had surrounded herself with saw her for what she was. And just like that, she was alone. Meanwhile, Em handled Ryan in her own way. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't beg for an explanation. Instead, she made him pay, literally. She drained the joint account they had opened together for their future plans. She sold the expensive watch he had bought for work and left him with nothing but his regret. And then, when he was scrambling, desperate to talk to her, she blocked his number, packed up his things, and had them dropped off at his new girlfriend's house because, of course, after Caitlin, Ryan had already moved on. It turned out they deserved each other after all. I filed for divorce the very next day. I made sure Caitlin got nothing. No house, no money, no sympathy from the court. She tried, of course, tried to play the role of the remorseful wife, the woman who had made a mistake and just needed another chance. But the evidence was stacked against her. Every lie, every betrayal, every dollar she had spent on Ryan was laid bare for the judge to see. There was no saving face. No redemption story. Just the cold, hard truth of her choices. She left the courtroom in tears. I left feeling lighter than I had in years. The weeks that followed were strange. There were moments when I expected to hear her keys in the door, when I half expected to see her curled up on the couch, pretending to be the devoted wife she had never truly been. But those moments passed. And every time they did, I felt a little stronger. A little freer. Em and I talked often. We had both been broken in different ways, but we found solace in knowing we had survived it together. She told me she was taking time for herself, focusing on her own happiness instead of chasing something she had only imagined was real. I admired that, and I promised myself I would do the same. As for Caitlin and Ryan, they got exactly what they deserved. Ryan, who had once acted like he had everything under control, lost his job. Turns out, sleeping with a married woman while pretending to be the perfect boyfriend didn't sit well with his employer. Caitlin, with nowhere left to turn, ended up alone. The last I heard, she had moved out of state, trying to start fresh where people didn't know her name, where her reputation hadn't already crumbled beneath her feet. But that wasn't my concern anymore. Betrayal had sought to break us, but Em and I had emerged victorious, leaving our traitors to drown in the wreckage of their own making. As I walked away from it all, I reflected on the painful lessons learned. Trust was fragile, and once broken, it could never truly be restored. But I had also discovered something else, my own strength. The resilience to stand up for myself, to fight back when wronged, and to choose my own dignity over blind devotion. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt free. And that was enough.